Welcome. Today we are here to discuss Snake in the Grass. More specifically, we'll focus on the question, in what way does Snake in the Grass use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media product?
Before they created Snake in the Grass, they researched the specific genre, noir. This includes things such as characters, setting, themes, visual styles, narrative, and the progression of film noirs.
Coming on the screen now are some examples of characters that used in film noir. Here is a gangster, detective, and a protagonist.
Gangsters were included in Snake in the Grass. We will now show you a clip of each of the different gangsters that were involved. Tony Penziero, who was played by Jack Waterman.
Johnny, are you suggesting that all my ideas ain't great ideas?
Paulie, who was played by Daniel Gorman.
Boss, remember, you asked Johnny to dispose of Frankie? Speaking of Johnny, he's late.
And Johnny, who was played by Ethan Lang.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea, boss.
These characters were, of course, used to ensure that the film creators followed the conventions of a typical noir film. Conventionally, noir films are used to show that the characters are trapped in the city with no escape. Matthew and Kenya, the directors, showed in their film they did this by using storyline and characters.
The storyline goes like this. A detective
Walking down a lonely street on a cold November day with a slate that now needs to be wiped clean.
starts to go and question if he is on the wrong side, and eventually makes his decision after the gang had shown him the way things could be from the other side.
The way they showed the convention of feeling trapped through the characters was by involving the character Dominic Hudson very early into the corrupt job.
You. I want you to find this new guy. Tell him to start preparing for his first job.
As you've just heard on the clip, Tony Penziero says the word new. This would imply that the characters don't even need to be trusted to be able to join the gang's operations.
The main character, Dominic Hudson, has many roles such as it being a detective, corrupt cop, and a protagonist. This developed the conventions of their film because the one character is the main focus for the audience. It also means that this developed convention will intrigue the audience. The audience will then try to focus on the character because they feel the need to connect and understand the character Dominic Hudson.
We've got one. Go on.
Alleys, bars, lounges, police stations, and empty streets are all conventions of a film noir. They used some of these conventional places in their media product. The setting they used were an office, a lounge, and an abandoned street.
The office they used is technically an office in a police station.
A woman? Why a woman?
They used an abandoned street for the murder scene. You see, I had to put a stop to this, but at the same time, he lived a pretty cozy life. Also, they used a lounge, which included a lot of conventions in itself.
Paulie. Tell me, do I look like the kind of man who appreciates a suck-up?
As you've just seen in the clip, there was a pool table. This is a convention they used because there would be a pool table in a gang hideout, more specifically in a gang member's house that runs all the operations. This is a strong convention because it makes the film look like it is set in the 1950s.
Can I go now?
Before filming, they had to make sure that they had the right filming location. Here's some of the locations considered. After Kenya and Matthew talked about the locations, they decided they did not have mise-en-scene.
They chose to use the conventions of a noir mise-en-scene. This made sure the audience believed the film Snake in the Grass was set in the 1950s.
Now let's talk about the opening sequence, and how it uses some of the conventional themes, and how they also challenged the conventional way of using the themes. The themes they used were murder, betrayal, and jealousy.
They challenged these conventions by making Dominic Hudson use all of these conventions on his own. Normally feelings like jealousy and betrayal are portrayed by different characters. However, they have challenged this and made only one character feel all these emotions. This makes Dominic Hudson an edgy character and an interesting character.
Narratives have many forms, such as flashbacks, voiceovers, first-person narrative, and flash-forward narrative. The directors decided to use a mixture of narrative, such as flashback, first-person narrative, and a voice-over narration. Using all of these themes made the film more interesting and intriguing to the audience. This will allow the audience to have a little glimpse into the rest of the film.
To make sure they had a wide understanding of different institutions, they researched who was most likely to produce their noir film, Snake in the Grass. They did this by taking a wide variety of noir films from different points in time.
They carried on to choose a couple and research who produced them and how much the film made in profit overall. Kenya chose Warner Brothers as the producer, however they did not specialize in noir films, so they went with Matthew's option. This option was Paramount Pictures, and as you can see from the clip, Paramount Pictures did decide to produce their film.
Both Kenya and Matthew looked at two different opening sequences. This meant that they could choose a variety of conventions to bring back and use in their film. The convention that Kenya found was a flash forward. This was in the film opening Bugsy Malone.
They decided that using a conventional flashback would give Snake in the Grass a nice smooth feel, giving the audience just enough glimpses into what is going to happen in the rest of the film. Kenya looked at Sunset Boulevard as another opening sequence. Sunset Boulevard's titles are in different order from the modern conventional titles. They did not choose to use a conventional title sequence like in Sunset Boulevard, because in modern times it would bore the audience. This would make the opening sequence uninteresting and therefore people would not watch their film.
They liked this convention when the film Sunset Boulevard showed the murder victim in the opening sequence. They incorporated this into the opening sequence by showing Tony Penziero laying dead on the floor at the end of the sequence.
They use this convention because it intrigues the audience and makes them think of these questions. Why did Tony get murdered? What will happen to the rest of the gang? What happened to the operation they were on? This will make the audience want to watch the rest of the film and be able to find out the answers.
Matthew watched the opening sequence for James Bond Casino Royale. This opening sequence was focused around gambling and private meeting rooms. To follow this convention, they decided to include a private room in the opening sequence, and this opening sequence also lets the audience know what type of character the person is.
For further research, they need to find out the chronological order that the titles should appear on their opening sequence. They did this by looking at two different opening sequences. Kenya looked at the opening sequence for Natural Born Killers, and Matthew looked again at James Bond Casino Royale's opening sequence.
Watching the opening sequence allowed them to show how long the titles should stay visible on the screen and which order they should show up in.
To make sure they follow conventions, they used the correct order of titles, although they did challenge one title convention by putting the name of our film at the end of the sequence. Choosing this order made sure that the title of their film was remembered in the audience's mind right at the end of the opening sequence.
Kenya created a survey which was given out to a wide variety of people. This was so they could find out what the audience would expect to see in Snake in the Grass. However, doing this showed the directors that 90.9% of people surveyed knew nothing about noir genre or the conventions it normally follows.
Even though the audience didn't know as much about the noir genre, they still liked some of the conventions that were usually found in noir films, such as plot twists, which is a huge convention of noir. They made sure they used this convention in their film because 70% of the audience liked plot twists. Therefore, using this convention gave them a bigger audience. An example of how they used plot twists is when the detective murdered Tony Penziero.
After finding they decided they should stick as closely to they could as the noir conventions. An example of this would be when they picked the names for the characters such as Tony Penziero, Paulie and Dominic Hudson.
However, the directors did challenge some conventions of noir. These were things such as not including some conventional characters like the femme fatale. They made this decision so that the audience focused more on the storyline of the main character, Dominic Hudson, rather than focusing on the romance that would distract the character and the audience.
Also, they pushed the boundaries for the narrative of the story, because in their opening sequence they created a narrative where the character is letting the audience in on the sequence by directly talking to them. This is challenging conventions because the characters are breaking the fourth wall between the characters and the audience.
That's all for today's news, but come back tomorrow when we're interviewing the characters from Snake in the Grass.